So the first two ideas were that consumerism doesn't satisfy and that the promotion of consumerism should be avoided. The third idea takes a more positive, more positive angle. It focuses on productive private property. The idea is that just because consumerism isn't harmful, it doesn't mean that the desire to own property is itself a bad thing. The desire to own property is a natural and a useful thing. John Paul wrote that ownership of private property is fundamental for the autonomy and development of the person. Following this, the Catechism of the Catholic Church says that the role of private property is for guaranteeing the freedom and dignity of persons and for helping each of them to meet his basic needs and the needs of those in his charge. The difficulty with this in contemporary society is that we have come to look to the state as the guarantor of freedom and dignity and not to individual private property. Here's a bunch of people lining up for their government assistance. My point here is not to criticize government assistance. It obviously has a role to play. I only want to make the point that while there was a time when people looked to their own property for their security and independence in life, nowadays, because the majority of people have come to depend on their government for their security, they no longer see private property as security and instead think of it as a source of pleasure. So when we talk about private property today, the images that come to mind are vacation homes and yachts. And incidentally, this is why the institution of private property becomes so difficult to defend politically. If private property is seen as just a luxury of the rich, rather than as security for the many, then we should not be surprised when we see more and more attacks on property rights. We need to recover this original purpose of private property, and the way to do this, I would like to suggest, is to promote the idea of productive property, to convince people that there's nothing wrong with working hard to acquire property, but they should be focusing primarily on acquiring productive property. When the average person thinks of acquiring property, he thinks of a larger home or a vacation home or a more luxurious car, and these things in themselves are not bad. What is not right, though, is to make them the priority. The priority instead should be given to productive property, to investment. So while it's a fallacy to look to your possessions for your happiness, there's nothing wrong with acquiring possessions if they are productive. And so this third idea to promote is the importance of productive property. Productive property provides security and independence for families. So instead of just thinking of a larger house and a better car, we should encourage people to think in terms of buying properties to rent out, for example, or buying a share in a business or some other investment. The same applies to consumer debt. We should be hammering home the idea that borrowing money for anything other than a productive use is a terrible idea. Borrowing money to take your family away on a holiday is the worst kind of consumerism because you're consuming resources you don't even have yet. So to be clear, I don't think we want to be making specific rules here. The decisions have to be made by each family and not imposed on them. That's why I believe that trying to address consumerism through tax policy, as some have suggested, is not a good idea because it's a violation of subsidiarity. We should not impose these things from the outside, but I think we should promote this idea of a greater focus on productive property as a source for security and independence for families, against the idea of property as just another aspect of consumerism. The other benefit of focusing on productive property is that it helps us advance the universal destination of the earth's goods. The idea of the universal destination, in the words of John Paul, is that God gave the earth to the whole human race for the sustenance of all its members, without excluding or favoring anyone. As I think you know, the universal destination of goods does not contradict the idea of private property. It just tells us what we're supposed to do with our property. Instead of using my property for my exclusive enjoyment, I should use it to support my family, to serve others, to provide employment, give to charity, and so on. And productive property does exactly that. Productive property produces more property, more wealth, and also provides opportunities for employment, while property that is consumed does none of these things. So let me sum up. Consumerism is physically, psychologically, and spiritually harmful, and it consumes resources that could be dedicated to development. I have suggested that we try to promote the three ideas that help counter it. First, that consumerism does not satisfy. Second, that we should not promote consumerism. And third, that the pursuit of productive property is a healthy and useful alternative to consumerism. Together, I suggested these three ideas could help fight consumerism and free up more resources for development. Thank you.